Good evening, everybody. Welcome back to what is sadly the penultimate session of the Two Towers class. The Two Towers class is kind of zoomed by here, I would say, over this past month. Today we are getting to some of my favorite parts of the entire Lord of the Rings. I will confess that the final few chapters of the Two Towers are pretty much my favorite bit. I mean, I always have loved the Battle of Helm's Deep, and the Battle of Pelennor Field makes me weep every time. But it's hard to beat Shelob's Lair and the choices of Master Samwise. So next week I'm particularly excited about. But Stairs of Cirith Ungol have always been a favorite of mine too. So today we're going to get into looking at what's going on with Frodo and Gollum's big decision moment. That's where I hope to get to by the end. But I want to begin by going back for a little bit to Faramir. That is, I'm not going backwards and talking about last class. I totally finished the stuff I wanted to say last time. But I didn't want to leave Faramir behind entirely, and I have the justification that he still is in the beginning of the first chapter we're supposed to talk about tonight, without talking about Faramir's choice. We've been talking about choices and decisions and the premises of people's decisions, and I don't want to completely overlook the fact that Faramir, of course, has just made a pretty significant choice in his decision to allow Frodo to go free and to take Gollum under his protection. In fact, did you notice the parallelism between what happens here with Faramir and Frodo and what happened with Éomer and Aragorn back in chapter 2? This is a very close parallel, actually. Both of them, both Éomer and Faramir, are not the Lord and cannot lay aside the law. And the law is very strict and very clear about what they should do with strangers that they find wandering around. Faramir has a little bit more authority than Éomer, perhaps, but the law is that he is going against is far more strict under the circumstances, since he is in fact in enemy-occupied territory in a time of war. So both of them are confronted with very similar choices between a stern and clear law on the one hand, and on the other hand, a more sort of private duty, a challenge to their own sense of honor. Both of them, both Éomer and Faramir, can see that Aragorn and Frodo, respectively, seem to be, men of honor and going about, are friends and, are doing something which is, would be good for them to help and not to hinder. But yet they are faced with a moral dilemma. Do they obey the law, or do they, in fact, set it aside? Possibly at the jeopardy of themselves by going beyond their authority. And both of them choose to do the right thing, and to do it for a very similar kind of reason. Both of them believe that the thing that the other person... trying to talk of both of them at the same time is making me get my pronouns all messed up. Let me just talk about Faramir. Faramir, can see that what Frodo is doing is important. He is here doing what... I think clearly what he would, believe Gandalf would want done. Frodo, you notice, sort of played that card at one point. Certainly, he plays it with the sparing of Gollum. That is, this is what Gandalf would clearly want, would tell you to do if he were here, as Faramir obviously trusts Gandalf's judgment. But both of them are both Éomer and Faramir are put into a parallel situation. Now, the difference, there's a difference in scale, I would say, a significant difference in scale. With Aragorn and Éomer, the main emphasis that Aragorn has is, he said, the sort of the trump card that Aragorn plays in his discussion with Éomer is, in days of yore, nobody, no man of the mark would have tried to compel somebody to abandon a quest such as mine, right? You are honorable people, all honorable people of the mark, unless things are much changed in the mark, they would honor and respect the purpose, my pursuit of my friends who have been kidnapped by orcs, and would not seek to get in the way of that just in order to fulfill this law. With Frodo and Faramir, the situation is much more difficult. Frodo ends up through Sam's kind of inadvertent assistance, revealing his quest to Faramir. And so Faramir has to make the choice. Does he go along with what Gandalf and Elrond and Galadriel have apparently all been fine with? Does he let the quest continue, or does he bring the Ring of Power back to Denethor? One thing, there are several ways in which I am sort of negatively thankful for the sort of awful depiction of Faramir in the films. That is, I'm not thankful that Faramir was depicted that way, but there are several ways in which the depiction of Faramir in the films really helps to throw Faramir's true awesomeness in the books into much sharper relief. For instance, the choice that he makes in the films, on the one hand, his choice to bring the ring back to Denethor, is, if you can get past, your Tolkien purist instincts, which very understandably are screaming, Faramir would never do that, this is awful. I know that's what Tolkien fans are always saying at that time in the film. But if you can kind of set that aside or quiet that voice just a little bit, in fact, what movie Faramir does makes sense and is actually, in many ways, the much more sensible, clearly the safest thing for him to do. That's obviously, and he knows it. I mean, even in the book, he knows when he gets back and reports to his father, this is a good chance that his father is going to be really mad. A good chance that his father would not have done the same thing that he did. So the fact that Faramir does what he does is not a given. And I think that sometimes we can take for granted how significant a decision Faramir makes to, on his own authority, off his own bat, just say, okay, I'm going to permit the Ring of Power to be taken by these two hobbits, accompanied by nobody other than that murderous, treacherous creature, whose honesty and faithfulness, I have deep suspicions. With only accompanied by him, I'm going to let these two hobbits take the Ring of Power off into Mordor. We've talked before about how that plan doesn't seem like a good plan. It doesn't seem like a practical plan. It doesn't seem like a winning strategy. So Faramir has to sign on to that non-winning strategy, knowing much less than Elrond and Gandalf and Galadriel do about the whole big picture. And he has to do that against not only the sort of advice, but against the expressed orders of his father. Not that his father has sent express orders of, like, if you find the Ring of Power, do make sure you bring it back. But rather, he's got to know that if Frodo and Sam are any kind of an exception to that law about not letting strangers wander free in their realm at this time, the exception's got to be in the other direction. Like, I would think that Denethor would say, no, you should make twice as certain to bring them in, right? Because we need to make sure what's going on here. This is something that the Lord of Minas Tirith would really probably like to make the call on himself, rather than have Faramir doing that in the field. So again, it's a big deal, what Faramir chooses to do. And you're right, Sharon. Sharon says Faramir doesn't try to justify or rationalize the law. He knows the cost of his choice. Yeah, he says, my life will be forfeit if I choose amiss. And of course, Éomer, remember, also puts himself in jeopardy. He is in fact in prison when Aragorn returns, and he tells Aragorn explicitly that I'm putting perhaps my very life in trust, that you're going to keep your word and that you're going to come and return these horses and present yourself to the king. Frodo is not given any such condition. Again, notice under much more drastic circumstances, Faramir makes a much more drastic choice. And he gives him free run of Gondor and its and all of its ancient bounds for a year and a day. He lets him go without qualification. And as Emily points out, we see again someone wise making the seemingly foolish decision. Yeah, the line between wisdom and foolishness, true wisdom very often does seem to look like foolishness in The Lord of the Rings. And those of you, when I say that, those of you who are suddenly having New Testament verses running through your heads, I think are correct. I think that that 1 Corinthians chapter 1 theme of, the wisdom of God seeming as foolishness to men is always been something that I think is a concept that we can see sort of running throughout this, because it's very consistent. This is one of the things I was wanting to look at back when we were talking about Saruman. Saruman's choices are wise from the point of view of any kind of pragmatic person. What he has done and is choosing to, maybe turning against Sauron and trying to set up on his own is a bit risky, a bit of a gamble, but really actually not necessarily, not so much, because of the distance separating them, and because there are lots of ways he could play that, and of course, indeed, he is at least pretending to be loyal. It's really only these darned Ents that show up unexpectedly and wreck his plans, and really, who could be expected to calculate on the forest marching on Isengard, after all? Yeah. Interesting. Carissa says, in Faramir's case, I hesitate to think of it as a choice. He is ruled by humility and wisdom, and recognizes this quest is larger than himself, and therefore he relinquishes control, and his only choice is in the advice he gives. I see what you mean, Carissa. It's not the same thing. Notice I'm not trying to parallel Faramir's choice with, say, Aragorn's choice of whether or not to go after Frodo or whether or not to chase after Merry and Pippin. That, I think, is a very different kind of choice. You're right. But he is making a choice, and he has to decide his course of action. And remember, rather a big deal is made of that, in fact. There's that moment when Frodo, using rather, sort of formalized language, says, but Lord Faramir, you have not yet, decreed your judgment concerning the said Frodo. That he is awaiting not just a choice, not just a decision by Faramir, but a doom. And that word is used here. Faramir decrees a doom here. He makes a judgment, like as a wigged judge would do here. He sets himself up as a judge in almost like a judge in a court of law here, decreeing something. So in this is in a sense also going back to the question of his relationship to the law. He does in fact take to himself, under the restrictions that he is living under, that is, he can't permanently set it aside, but he does set it aside for a year and a day, right? He gives himself that much authority. But he does, in fact, decree something about the law. Aragorn doesn't talk, or Éomer, doesn't talk like that, wouldn't talk like that. He would not decree dooms when he's talking to Aragorn. All he can do with Aragorn is make a personal decision, give a pledge of faith in Aragorn, and insist and hope that Aragorn will reciprocate that personal pledge of faith and show his own Aragorn's own personal faith back to Éomer and justify his own decision. Faramir is decreeing a doom. He's passing a sentence on Frodo, who is guilty of trespass. He is, in fact, in contravention of the law that nobody is supposed to be traveling in Ithilien. I mean, Faramir's got him banged to rights on that one. So Faramir is passing a doom in that way. So, Carissa, in that sense, I do say it definitely is a choice, but I do see what you mean, that when he's making that choice, in the end, it's not about simply what he wants to do. And this is, I think, the major contrast, again, that we can see that the film really brings out for me, right? Faramir in the film makes the wrong choice. It's a very understandable choice. It's even a very defensible choice. But the reason he makes it in the film is clearly because of the rather more exaggerated daddy issues that Faramir in that movie Faramir has. Now, book Faramir has daddy issues too. Let's not have any two ways about that. And it's actually the thing I like best about movie Faramir. I think that Peter Jackson, obviously he does make it much bigger. He gives the whole father-son issues with Denethor and Boromir and Faramir, gives that much more prominence in the film. But it's there in the books. And I do think that that's both a defensible and an interesting move on Peter Jackson's part. But the point is, Carissa, coming back to your point, movie Faramir makes that decision, and it's motivated by a personal agenda, right? He says he's going to send Frodo back to Minas Tirith, and he quotes out of context in one of those moments, which always kind of strikes me as sort of surreal, seeing the films and knowing the books really well, when they quote a line totally out of context and even switch it around and reverse it. When he says, tell him that Faramir sends him a mighty gift, right? Again, you can clearly see that he is motivated by these kinds of personal, he's not motivated by justice or wisdom. He's motivated by his desire to please his father, and his hope that if he accomplishes this, if he does this thing of which his father, he hopes, would very much approve, that his father will then love him as much as he loved Boromir. And that's exactly, Carissa, as you're pointing out, what the book Faramir sets aside almost completely. He's willing to take the consequences, as Sharon pointed out, but he does not allow any of those kind of personal concerns to factor in, and he, as you say, he is simply ruled by humility and wisdom, as Carissa says, and I would add, and therefore rules through humility and wisdom as well. Yeah, good. Mike says, hi Mike, good to see you again. Mike Thurway of the Silmarillion Seminar, always good to see some of the old Silmarillionaires back in the net mood here. Mike says that he takes the leap that Gandalf takes, but he views the quest and his choice as hopeless. Yeah, he doesn't say, he says he doesn't expect to see Frodo again, right? That he doesn't think going to Cirith Ungol is a good idea. He doesn't think that following Gollum is a good idea. Everything, in some ways, I said he's working on less information than Galadriel and Gandalf was. Well, in some ways he has more information. That is, concerning the actual plan. The last any of them, Gandalf, Elrond, Galadriel, knew was Galadriel. She's the one with the most, when she encounters Frodo, the most recent information. And all they're doing is sending the party down towards Mordor, and they don't know how things are going to go. Now here's Faramir knowing exactly where they're going to go, and that Gollum, who is being corrupted by malice and conceiving treachery and with murder in his heart, is leading them to this place, to Morgul Vale and to Cirith Ungol, which he believes to be a complete disaster. Knowing that, so this is not just, gosh, what are the odds of a halfling finding his way into Mordor? Well, whatever they were, they're worse now. Faramir has reason to think that whatever odds would have been placed on Frodo's success from Rivendell or even from Lorien, they're much lower now, knowing exactly where they're going. And yet, he lets them go. And he seems to let them go because he recognizes, thinking of Aragorn's phrase of, the fate of the bearer is in my hands no longer. I think that Faramir does recognize there's a bigger thing going on here. And that, in one sense, it's kind of above his pay grade. Alyssa makes a good counter argument. Alyssa says, is reminding us of Frodo's counter argument, where he says that, would you have two dead cities grinning at each other, across a land filled with rottenness? Alyssa points out through that quotation that Frodo is pointing him in the direction of at least one personal motivation. That is, if you love your city, you will not send me there. So it would be foolish to do that. That's true, Alyssa. That doesn't say that he has to let him go to Cirith Ungol. But yes, you're right that Frodo does go there. He does play that. But actually, it's funny, Alyssa. I was actually thinking. When I was reading that this past time, that Frodo's counter-argument is kind of specious. It's kind of a weak counter-argument. I mean, not that he isn't right to say, that it would be a bad idea to bring this thing that drove Boromir mad with desire to Minas Tirith, that might have some, bad outcome. That certainly seems like a perfectly plausible statement. But the way that he manipulates the conversation at that point, Frodo, I mean, the way that Frodo manipulates the conversation so that basically he presents it as if there are only two options. Option one is to let us go and go on to Cirith Ungol following Gollum. The other option is to bring us back to Minas Tirith, have somebody claim the ring for their own, and have, two cities of Minas Morgul staring at each other. I don't think that's true. There are other options, and the way that he sort of characterizes any alternative to that, again, I think it's actually I don't find it a terribly convincing argument, in that there's certainly Faramir has more options to him than just those two. But Rachel has a good question, and Rachel, I don't know the answer to this. Rachel says, I've always wondered why Faramir didn't tell Frodo what was supposed to be in Cirith Ungol. He speaks Elvish, so he must have known that it means the Pass of the Spider. All I'd say about that is that he might know that that's the translation, but he might not know what that means, or that it's literal. That is to say, there are lots of reasons why, just because you know that something is called the Pass of the Spider, doesn't mean that the only obvious explanation of that fact is that there's actually a huge, ginormous, monstrous, sentient, evil, ancient spider that lives up there. In fact, I would argue that that's one of the less plausible explanations for that. Though it's not the first one that would occur to me. There aren't that many Shelobs in the world, after all. In fact, there are no other Shelobs in the world. So, anymore, that is. So, it's not the obvious explanation. All he says about it, he says that, when Cirith Ungol is named, then men of lore blanch. He's like, it clearly, there are evil stories about this. There is some evil associated with Cirith Ungol. He does tell him that much. He doesn't seem to have more specific information. Good. Let's see. Oh, yeah, Yana, thanks for mentioning this. It is worth mentioning in passing. Yana points out that, he noticed that Frodo threatens to use the ring again to force Gollum to do something when he's getting him out of the pool. Thought that was worth mentioning. Yeah, not only that, Yana threatens to murder him with the ring, in fact. Now, he doesn't mean it. He isn't actually planning to do that, but you're right. That's a level up from, in the last need, I would put the ring on and tell you to jump off a cliff. If you don't come, I will put on Precious and make him swallow the bones and choke, right? That's, and again, Frodo is being merciful, and he feels awful about even appearing treacherous to Gollum. He knows he's saving Gollum's life, but he knows it looks bad, and that Gollum is going to think he's betraying him. So we can see, Frodo's good heart in that whole area, but it's still pretty sketchy, isn't it? Even if he doesn't mean it at all, it is, I think, pretty suggestive. Alyssa points out, correction, that literally in Sindarin, in the Lord of the Rings era Sindarin, Cirith Ungol would more literally be gloomy pass. So, sort of shadowy pass, in which case it would just blend in with all the, some mountains of shadow, gloomy pass. Of course it's gloomy. What else would it be? Yeah. So there wouldn't even be that direct a cue. Good. Susan, a good point. I mean, you're right. Susan says, I've always wondered why Faramir didn't send more help with Frodo and Sam. This seems to be Glorfindel and the Council of Elrond all over again. Not even what about, Mablung and Damrod, right? Anborn, is he busy right now? Can he spare one or two guys to go along? They wouldn't hurt, right? Would they? Yeah, Susan, I see you're thinking. But again, you're exactly right that it's the same thinking as saying, okay, no, maybe Glorfindel couldn't do it by himself, but seriously, he'd be a net gain, right? I mean, it's what's the downside? Right, so in other words, we can see that he is following very closely in the footsteps of the kind of wise, though apparently foolish actions that the other wise people were doing. Sharon points out, which men could he trust in the presence of the ring? Agreed. Yeah, Diego was wondering the same thing. Would other men be able to resist the ring? Well, first of all, I guess they would have to know about it. We can, that's pure extrapolation. Had Faramir considered sending people with him and rejected it, what would be his reasons? We don't get any of that. So this becomes pure sort of fiction on our part, trying to hash that out. Maybe I'm a little bit resistant, I have to say. The movies made a big deal of the fact that, men are weak. Men are particularly susceptible to this. I'm a little resistant to that. I think the evidence is a little shaky on that point, actually. That men are much more likely than others. I mean, clearly the only people who are actually safer categorically are hobbits. That's why it makes sense that the small should do this. But yeah, Carolyn is pointing out the same thing about the fear of others that he sent with him being corrupted. And I agree with Trish that after Frodo's experience with Boromir, he might likely turn down companions. And perhaps his paranoia would be increased by his own increasing relationship with the ring. All quite plausible. But I think the simpler answer is just that Faramir sees, basically the decision that he makes is, what you are doing, you're operating on a higher doom than mine, right? You're in my court right now. I am your judge right now, but there's something much bigger going on here. I recognize that. I see that, again, the doom that Frodo is following is something he's not going to tamper with. So his decision is just to say, you were on your way. I'm going to let you on your way. I'll help you all that I can. I'll give you food. I'll make these awesome staves for you. I will, I'll lay a blessing upon you and a curse upon those who would betray you. I'll do it, but I'm just going to let you go because you were doing your thing, and I see that your thing is really important, and I'm going to get out of the way of your thing. I agree, Mike. It certainly is a harder doom. Definitely. So anyway, so that's my reading. Not any kind of sort of pragmatic things about that it would actually be a bad idea to send people. Perhaps I'm not saying that there's no merit in any of those arguments, but I don't think that that's what's motivating Faramir. Anyway, So anyway, I just wanted to say one or two very brief things about Faramir there, and then after you see the we've only been talking about this for 3 to 5 minutes, then we're going to move on, because you have of course become accustomed to how efficient we are with this now. I want to talk about the crossroads, and again I want to, at the risk of taking extra time, I want to pause and look at stuff that I almost never get to look at when I teach this book. That is, thinking about as in the passages we were discussing last time, where we can see Tolkien kind of placing a metaphorical significance on some of the features of the landscape that they're passing through. I want to draw our attention again to some of these moments of landscape description that Tolkien does. Tolkien's narrative style, of course, is very heavy on landscape description. Everybody who dislikes Tolkien, and specifically Tolkien's style, always complains bitterly about this fact. Everybody, all the Tolkien haters can't stand the fact that he spends so much time describing the plant life and everything else that's going on around them. But I wanted to just look at a couple sort of shortish passages here, because I think if we actually pay attention to the landscape description, there is much virtue in it. Of course, it's not only the fact that we can sort of visualize this. I mean, I think there's a reason why. There are several reasons why the world that Tolkien describes in his book is so powerful, and why even, it's not just with The Lord of the Rings, it's not just the characters that he wrote, it's not just the story that he tells, it's the world that he creates that people want to enter into and live there. They really care about that world, and invest their imaginations very heavily in that world. And that kind of a reaction to a book is very unusual. Again, there are lots of great stories. There are lots of great characters. There are very few books that inspire the same kind of involvement with the whole world, the whole subcreation that Tolkien does. And I do think that his intimate descriptions of that world and its landscapes are a part of that. But that's not what I'm focusing on. What I want to focus on is, yes, Emily says, as my friend says, it takes 100 pages to go one step in the forest. Sometimes it might seem like that. Anyway, I just wanted to show one example of some of the things that I think we can see happening, sort of extra layers that Tolkien gives to some of his landscapes. So this is the three of them beginning to approach the crossroads in Ithilien. As soon as they were down, they went on again with Gollum leading eastwards up the dark sloping land. They could see little, for the night was now so deep that they were hardly aware of the stems of trees before they stumbled against them. The ground became more broken and walking was more difficult, but Gollum seemed in no way troubled. He led them through thickets and wastes of brambles, sometimes round the lip of a deep cleft or dark pit, sometimes down into black bush-shrouded hollows and out again. But if ever they went a little downward, always the further slope was longer and steeper. They were climbing steadily. At their first halt they looked back, and they could dimly perceive the roofs of the forest they had left behind, lying like a vast dense shadow, a darker night under the dark blank sky. There seemed to be a great blackness looming slowly out of the east, eating up the faint blurred stars. Later, the sinking moon escaped from the pursuing cloud, but it was ringed all about with a sickly yellow glare. Now, part of the reason for this, one of the trends I would point to in this description is them passing into darkness. We know that the crossroads is a big deal, right? We have this crossroads. It's not just, a map feature here. And the fact that it gets a chapter title talking about it, and, the sort of the obvious metaphorical significance of crossroads, as sort of a moment of decision or a moment of transition. when they go to the crossroads, they've been in Ithilien. Ithilien has been awesome. Now they're finally really approaching the land of Mordor. They approached it once already, and then they kind of backed off. Now they're approaching it again and preparing to enter it. So, of course, they're traveling into darkness. They're moving into shadow. That is being accentuated, of course, by the fact that at this moment, that blackness from Mordor, that evil cloud cover, that Mordor murk, that is going to be blotting out the sun and the moon and the stars, is creeping over them. But again, it's, from a narrative standpoint, not a coincidence that at this point, as they're crossing through Ithilien, coming up upon the crossroads and moving towards Minas Morgul, that's the moment when the darkness begins to envelop them. And we get the descriptions of the broken and difficult land, the thickets and wastes of brambles. Ithilien, presumably there were lots of brambles in the rest of Ithilien. You see those a lot in forests. But now the way that he's describing it through thickets and wastes of brambles, I like even the sound of those words, with all those S's and TS's. The going around clefts and pits, it's beginning to be, more broken, more rough, more, the land itself is sort of becoming more sinister. The forest that they left behind, which was a nice forest, remember, it was quite lovely. Now it's lying like a vast, dense shadow, as they begin to move across towards the crossroads, into Mordor. The description of the crossroads itself is really cool. I'd love to read more of it, but let me restrict myself to one thing. And again, I point this out because it's exactly the kind of thing that's so easy to skim, or even if you don't skip anything, to kind of let your mind go to sleep a little bit. I mean, it's a very natural tendency that a lot of people have when you're reading a long description like this. Some people really get into that, and that's really cool. But it's really easy to just kind of let your mind drift. As you're like, okay, descript forest. When is something going to happen? When is somebody going to say something? It's sometimes you have to remain actively vigilant to keep that from happening. But anyway, so here's an example of a little moment that's kind of easy to miss if you do that. Here's the actual crossroads itself. Presently, not far ahead, looming up like a black wall, they saw a belt of trees. As they drew nearer, they became aware that these were of vast size, very ancient, it seemed, and still towering high, though their tops were gaunt and broken, as if tempest and lightning blast had swept across them, but had failed to kill them or to shake their fathomless roots. It's just trees, right? It's just trees around the ancient crossroads. But, of course, again, I think that we can see another metaphor here. These trees here seem to be, kind of like the road, kind of like that window on the west. These trees sound like Numenor again to me, or like the Numenorian realms in exile here. We have here the ancient tree, to use Faramir's awesome word. These trees as if they were trees planted by the Numenorians here at the crossroad, which are now very ancient and of vast size. We have them still towering high. We have their fathomless roots being unshakable, but yet we have their tops gaunt and broken, as if tempest and lightning blast had swept across them. This is like, again, there's a way in which this works as a metaphor for the particularly stubborn element of those things that the Numenorians have planted. The things that the Numenorians have planted have been damaged over time, but not everything crumbles with time. Some things lay down roots, and over time their roots are so deep that they can't be stirred anymore, and take a whole lot of killing. And these trees are still there and still surviving. And again, I think so. To me, having just come from Faramir, and then come to these trees, I can't help but sort of associate the two of them. It seems to me like a kind of a natural invitation here. But Mike rejects as monstrous this idea that people would skim and not pay attention to the descriptions and stuff. Yeah. Alyssa says, their deep roots are not reached by the Tempest. Right. Yeah, exactly. You can see a clear parallel again. And of course, yes, several of you are anticipating exactly what we're going to talk about next, which is, of course, the statue of the ancient king. Now, I talked about these trees first because, it's one of those moments where the king, the decapitated king statue at the crossroads, Frodo overtly points to that as a symbol, right? He's like, he takes that as a symbol of hope. It strikes him as a symbol of hope, and he interprets it symbolically. That's very clear. My point is that there are other places where that kind of interpretation, I think, is invited. It's not forced upon us, but I think it's invited, and we can see it working in some really fun ways. Yeah, I agree, Brianna. The juxtaposition between these headless trees and the headless stone king. I agree. I don't think that that's a coincidence here. But let's look at the stone king. I know we're all burning to look at the stone king, so let's look at him. Standing there for a moment, filled with dread. Oh, by the way, and I do welcome observations on this. Tell me what you notice. Tell me what you guys find especially interesting about the description here. Standing there for a moment, filled with dread, Frodo became aware that a light was shining. He saw it glowing on Sam's face beside him. Of course it's glowing on Sam's face. Where else would it be shining? If there's a light in the darkness, where else would you expect to see it except in Sam's face? Sorry. Turning towards it, he saw, beyond an arch of boughs, the road to Osgiliath, running almost as straight as a stretched ribbon down into the west. There, far away, beyond sad Gondor, now overwhelmed in shade, the sun was sinking, finding at last the hem of the great slow-rolling pall of cloud, and falling in an ominous fire towards the yet unsullied sea. The yet unsullied sea. The brief glow fell upon a huge sitting figure, still and solemn as the great stone kings of Argonath. The years had gnawed it, and violent hands had maimed it. Its head was gone, and in its place was set in mockery a round rough-hewn stone, rudely painted by savage hands, in the likeness of a grinning face, with one large red eye in the midst of its forehead. Upon its knees and mighty chair, and all about the pedestal, were idle scrawls mixed with the foul symbols that the maggot folk of Mordor used. Suddenly, caught by the level beams, Frodo saw the old king's head. It was lying rolled away by the roadside. "Look, Sam," he cried, startled into speech. "Look, the king has got a crown again." The eyes were hollow, and the carven beard was broken, but about the high stern forehead there was a coronal of silver and gold. A trailing plant with flowers like small white stars had bound itself across the brows, as if in reverence for the fallen king, and in the crevices of his stony hair yellow stone-crop gleamed. "They cannot conquer forever," said Frodo, and then suddenly the brief glimpse was gone. The sun dipped and vanished, and as if at the shuddering of a lamp, black night fell. Okay, tell me what you notice. Good. Yes, Emily is pointing out more setting suns. Yes, just like we had in the window on the west, we now, the light of the brilliant light of the shining sun, sort of magically transforming the curtain of the waterfall into all those, the gorgeous light and colors. So now the sun, the setting sun, just before it sets, comes down under the edge of the shadow. Comes out of the shadow and is about to go into the yet unsullied sea, and in that brief time in the middle shines outward and falls as it is falling in an ominous fire. Yeah. Tom points out it's that mythic tone again. Yes, I agree. You can see there is, although Tolkien's narrative descriptions, tend to be stately of diction at most times. I do think that we can see an elevation here. That he is, Tom, I agree, is kind of shifting into that kind of mythic register here. The yet unsullied sea particularly jumps out at me in that way. Yeah. Good. Kay points out that the orc head that is put up on top, the stone that the orcs put, is characteristic of the enemy's work. He doesn't create or subcreate in respectful response to beauty, or even trying to create beauty. He mimics and twists. Yes. Good. Mike points out that the passage is bookended with dread. Yes, black night falls at the end, and they are standing filled with dread at the beginning, and what comes in the middle, of course, as Carissa has pointed out, is hope. Right? And that, I think, is a really important element in this passage. We get, of course, the sort of the way in which this sort of serves as a prophecy, right? Especially since the little flowers are like stars, like the star, that Aragorn binds across his brow, when he returns. It does. It certainly seems like a clear prophecy that the king will return. But notice it's not what Frodo says exactly. Perhaps Frodo sees that. He does emphasize the king has got a crown again, right? And, he knows Aragorn, and he knows what Aragorn is doing, and so presumably contained within that statement, look, the king has got a crown again, he is implying, see, like, that's a good omen, right? If it's an omen, it's a good one. But notice that Frodo doesn't just say, hey, maybe that means we're going to win, or at least Aragorn's going to win, right? But the conclusion he takes from it is much broader than that. They cannot conquer forever, said Frodo. At the end of the day, the orcs who decapitated the statue of the king and set up the mockery, the grinning face in mockery, is yet, and Thomas pointing out that grinning is only used here, and in that passage we were talking about before about the two dead cities grinning at one another across a dead land filled with rottenness. Grinning in this context certainly seems to be an ominous word. But anyway, the orcs who set up this head, who decapitated the king and set up this head, in the end the joke is on them. They can't conquer forever. And the king has not only been crowned again despite their efforts, the king has been crowned again because of their efforts, as it's unlikely that the trailing vines that have worked their way around the head as it lies on the ground would probably not have ascended all the way to the top of the colossal statue and wound around the brows of the king up there. But again, not even in spite of, but because of the works of evil. Good can triumph. Evil cannot conquer forever. It's only a brief glimpse, and it's soon gone and blackness falls again. But it's a glimpse, and what it gives Frodo a glimpse of is not just specific concrete hope for their undertaking, but a much broader sort of point of view. And thinking back to the question of faith, of Frodo's faith that we were talking about before, this seems to be something which is an encouragement for him, which leads him to hope in this kind of broader way. Good. Ooh, Don, I like that. Don is saying is thinking about I'll just read Don's whole comment. The straight road, not the bent road, that leads to the west, capital W, west, that takes... it's... All right, I'll come in again. It's the straight, not bent road that leads into the capital W west that takes their glance to the unconquered head of the king. Yes, the straightness of that road may perhaps help us to... especially since... off in the direction of that straight road lies the yet unsullied sea, may perhaps remind us of that other straight path that leads away from the bent world and towards the undying lands. So yeah, that connection, I like that connection, Don. I think that's cool. Yeah, good. And Chris, I agree. The idea of Gondor overwhelmed in shade is talking about more than just the fact that the sun has gone down. Absolutely. And see, this is the kind of thing, just like with those the description of the trees, so many times, that kind of language, right? Which is, on the one hand, it's just a description, right? He's doing lots of description. Here's some more description. But many times the words that he chooses to use to describe something have a resonance beyond the mere literal signification of those words. And sometimes, as in a passage like this, it's pretty obvious. Again, indeed, Frodo himself is doing symbolic interpretation of the tableau that he's seeing here. But it's a good example, I think, that we should kind of keep in mind. Okay, good. Yeah. Good. As Susan points out, even if Frodo fails, they will not conquer forever. That is perhaps why this is a particularly potent reminder of hope for Frodo. Yeah, it's nice to think that this is a good omen, that they're going to win, and that Aragorn's going to become king and everything's going to turn out great. But that's not really the point. There's more to it than that. Yeah. Good. Tom says they cannot conquer forever is more defiance than hope. It's not a positive expression of what may come, but a negative expression of what won't continue. This reminds me of Aragorn looking out for the dawn at Helm's Deep. Cool. Yeah. Excellent. A bunch of you guys have made a bunch more really interesting observations, and I wish I could go through them all, but I should move on. Okay, all right. One last one. Brianna says the king here is decapitated and thus would seem to be dead, but is still victorious. Yeah, there is a sense, Brianna, isn't there, of something like resurrection here, right? The king that was dead is now rising again in his royalty, and again, that's like, not literally, of course, what Aragorn is doing, but it's like that. Yeah, good. But yes, Frodo's hope is, I think, one of the things that I really wanted to point to here. And I think it's interesting to put this next to the passage that we get when he sees the army coming out of Morgul in the next chapter. Frodo stirred, and suddenly his heart went out to Faramir. The storm has burst at last, he thought. This great array of spears and swords is going to Osgiliath. Will Faramir get across in time? He guessed it, but did he know the hour? And who can now hold the fords when the King of the Nine Riders comes? And other armies will come. I am too late. All is lost. I tarried on the way. All is lost. Even if my errand is performed, no one will ever know. There will be no one I can tell. It will be in vain. Overcome with weakness, he wept, and still the host of Morgul crossed the bridge. Frodo raised his head, and then stood up. Despair had not left him, but the weakness had passed. He even smiled grimly, feeling now as clearly as a moment before he had felt the opposite, that what he had to do, if he could. And that whether Faramir, or Aragorn, or Elrond, or Galadriel, or Gandalf, or anyone else ever knew about it was beside the purpose. He took his staff in one hand, and the file in his other. So what do we see happening here? This is not hope, right? Having just had a glimpse of hope, right? Having had hope built with him and his faith in, light and in sort of the big picture, refreshed at the crossroads. Now he is in despair. Despair clearly meaning despair for the success, like despair that the good guys are going to win, despair that the story is going to have a happy ending, right? He's not saying I'm never going to get the ring there now, right? No, he's saying even if I do get the ring there now, it's not going to matter, right? The whole land all of the land out to the west of here is going to be laid in ruin. So even if I do overthrow Sauron, it'll be too late. So awesome. So not only is there still very little chance of my succeeding, now it doesn't even matter if I do or not. Why should I even bother? That seems to be the temptation that he is confronting here. It will be in vain, right? It's useless. Not only was it hopeless from the beginning, now it's useless too. So even if I do beat the very long odds against me and succeed, it's not going to accomplish anything, right? And in his response is to smile grimly and to be determined to do what he has to do. What do we make of this? Let's see. Yeah, as Kay is reminded of Aragorn's statement when it looks like they're never going to find Merry and Pippin. He says, "This may be the end of hope, but not to toil." Remember Gimli saying, "Is this the end of all of our hope and all our toil?" And Aragorn responds cheerfully by saying, "To hope maybe, but not to toil." Right? No, we've still got plenty of work to do, even if we don't have any hope. Yes. One thing that is clear, one thing that is consistent among all of these people is your odds of success cannot be a factor in your determination to carry on and do the thing, right? And of course here defining success in a broad way, because again, this is not about the success of his quest for the Cracks of Doom. It's for the bigger picture. But yeah, even when hope ends, toil goes on. Yeah. And I agree with Alyssa. Frodo is here having a northern courage moment. This is a very sort of a Nordic, very very Germanic, heroic legend kind of moment here. It's one of the things that's so remarkable, that, as Tolkien pointed out many times, so remarkable about Norse mythology, is the whole thing is hopeless. Everybody knows the bad guys are going to win, and the gods are eventually going to be destroyed, and everything's going down. But that's okay. That's the way it is. You go ahead and you do it anyway, and you become more determined. That's what heroes do, is become more determined. Their strength harder as hope falters. I'm here vaguely paraphrasing and largely butchering a line from the Battle of Maldon in saying that. Yes. Yeah. Don was just saying the same thing about that northern courage. It does. Don says, fighting for the losing side is better. It's more courageous than fighting for the side whose victory is assured. Yeah. Yeah. Good. Okay, let's see. Chris, I agree. Chris says, I'm fascinated by the final line. Me too. I almost stopped before that last sentence. I almost stopped our passage here with ever knew about it was beside the purpose, because that sort of finishes the statement about hope and despair that I really wanted to talk about. But the imagery there, again, another one of those descriptive moments which seems to suggest so much more than the words literally say. He took his staff in one hand and the file in his other. Yes, carrying Galadriel's file, which contains the light of Earendil's star, the star of high hope, Gil Estel, in one hand, and the staff given to him by Faramir in the other hand, and off he goes. Chris, I agree. That little tableau, I think, is very evocative. Kay, that's an interesting observation. Kay says this seems to be the same as the means versus ends ethic. Characters must constantly do their part, regardless of what they predict the ends will be. Characters must choose the clear good duty before them, regardless of the ends, because even the wise cannot see all ends. So yeah, you can't give up just because it looks like everything is lost, because it looks like everything is hopeless. Apart from the Northern Courage thing, apart from the fact that going on and persevering even in the face of despair is what you're supposed to do. Apart from that, as Kay points out, and Kay, I think that's you hit upon the way in which the sort of the ethics of the Lord of the Rings differ from the Norse tradition. There is hope. Hope is an important element in ways in which hope is absent in Norse mythology. Hope in the larger sense is absent. Hope is definitely present. And Kay, even the wise can't see all ends. So yeah, does it look pretty hopeless? Yeah, sure it does. But I mean, come on, everything has looked hopeless from the beginning. You can't let that stop you. You shouldn't let that stop you. Yeah. Yeah, good. Yeah, excellent. Oh, Rachel, nice observation here. Rachel says, even though Frodo's speech ends in despair, he started with pity or concern for others, specifically Faramir. Even in his circumstances of danger, he thinks of his friends. No, I think that's a nice observation. Matthew points out, thinking about the staff and the file, that the staff and file are both tools of support. The staff to support him physically, and the file to support him spiritually. That's a neat way to think about it. Both are things which are designed. That's why I think the gift of the staves that Frodo and Sam get here is a very apt kind of gift, because he is literally helping them along their way in every way that he can. Right, I will support you on the journey. Physically, even as much as I can with these sort of blessed staves that I will give you. So yeah, Matthew, I think it's a really great way to think about it. Yeah, good. I want to I want to move from here to thinking about the sort of the bigger picture that they get in the. After all of this stuff, we get that glimpse of hope at the crossroads, Frodo's determination in the face of despair there in Morgul Vale. We're getting now to the famous conversation that Frodo and Sam have about stories on the stairs of Cirith Ungol. And I want to be thinking about this in this context, thinking about hope and faith, in the way that we've been talking about that. And the way that this stuff informs their decisions. And think about Sam's comments about stories in that regard. I don't like anything here at all, said Frodo. Step or stone, breath or bone, earth, air, and water all seem accursed, but so our path is laid. Now I know that Mike Thurway is about to point out how beautifully poetic Frodo's statement there is, right? How Frodo has just, sort of modulated with careful alliteration, with those, the two balanced pairs, then expanding to the triplet, step or stone, breath or bone, earth, air, and water all seem accursed. Really wonderful moment. So again, it's Frodo sort of triggers this literary discussion that Sam is going to with this highly poetic utterance. So yes, in honor of Mike joining us today, we have a little bonus style time. Anyway, yes, that's so, said Sam, and we shouldn't be here at all if we'd known more about it before we started. But I suppose it's often that way. The brave things in the old tales and songs, Mr. Frodo, adventures as I used to call them. I used to think that they were things the wonderful folk of the stories went out and looked for, because they wanted them, because they were exciting and life was a bit dull, a kind of sport, as you might say. But that's not the way of it with the tales that really mattered, or the ones that stay in the mind. Folk seem to have been just landed in them, usually. Their paths were laid that way, as you put it. But I expect they had lots of chances, like us, of turning back, only they didn't. And if they had, we shouldn't know, because they'd have been forgotten. We hear about those as just went on, and not all to a good end, mind you, at least not to what folk inside a story, and not outside it, call a good end. I want to draw our attention to the implication of Sam's words here, for the question of doom and choice that we've sort of been talking about, and I have, boldly touched on the question of free will and predestination before, and I think that this is a place where we can another place where we can actually see Tolkien kind of bringing these ideas together. Frodo says, "So our path is laid." We have no choice, right? This is the doom that is laid out for it. He's been speaking in those ways, which I was initially tempted to call fatalistic, right? And there are still moments which are kind of fatalistic, where he seems to speak as if we don't really have a choice. This is just kind of how things are, and we just kind of have to go along with it. Sam picks up on that. It's that comment, "But so our path is laid," which leads Sam into his discussion of the brave things in old tales and songs, right? He says, I suppose it's often that way. What is? About the choice. He said, we shouldn't have been here at all if we'd known more about it before we started. Had we known exactly what this would be like, we never would have agreed, back in the Council of Elrond, to come on this quest. But we did agree. So he's looking back at a choice that they made and said, we made this choice. So you notice, interestingly, Frodo starts off with saying, "So our path is laid," with a statement which sounds more fatalistic. Sam responds by saying, "Yeah, we really put our foot in it, didn't we?" Thinking of the expression he uses at the time, or the expression he just used. The expression he used at the time is "a nice pickle it is." That they've gotten themselves into a nice pickle. He doesn't foresee all the details, but he foresees in general terms that it's going to be a nice pickle. So again, he emphasizes choice, and recognizes, however, that Frodo's right about the path being laid in a certain way. And he recognizes that the adventures that he read about, the great tales, in the stories that he has heard, are not, in fact, recreational things. In other words, they're not things which are just 100% choice. The people, the wonderful folk of the stories, didn't just go out and look for fun things to do. Their paths were laid this way. These dooms were put upon them. Folks seem to have been just landed in them, he said. And then he quotes him, their paths were laid that way, right? In the great tales, people get into the stories and they don't actually have much of a choice about getting into them. But then he backs off again. Right? It was all about choice. And I used to think that people but now I realize it's not all about choice. That there really is a doom involved. There really is a destiny that puts people in these particular circumstances, whether they choose it or not. But now notice he goes back again. But I expect they had lots of chances like us of turning back, only they didn't. Right? There is still choice. Even if your path is laid in a particular way, that doesn't mean you are being compelled to walk down that path. You can turn and leave the path. You can turn around and walk back the other way down the path. You do, in fact, have that capability. It is an active choice. Frodo makes the choice to persevere in the face of despair. He grips his staff and he grips his file and he sets off walking in the direction of the stairs. He didn't have to do that. He's not compelled to do that. That is his choice, right? And that's what Sam emphasizes. And notice he doesn't just suggest it's theoretically possible that people like Beren and Tinuviel could have chosen otherwise and not done what they did. But he even recognizes that probably lots of people did make that choice. That over the course of history, there have probably been many circumstances where people were put in a path that was hard, were placed in a situation where they, had the opportunity, the option to, this sort of doom was placed upon them, but they did back out of it. They didn't follow through. They failed and were forgotten. Who knows how many of them there were? We wouldn't have any way of knowing, because of course they would be forgotten once they had done that. I guess, of course, we should, as Sharon is reminding me, make an exception for those who choose so spectacularly badly that history remembers them for that, like Turin. But I shouldn't spend another session teasing poor Turin. Anyway. And of course, he then points out the next thing, which is that, of course, it's not even, unfortunately, the choice is not a straightforward choice. That is to say, okay, if your path is laid out for you, a simple thing would be to say, well, obviously, if a path is laid out before you, you follow that, right? Because if Providence has laid out a path before you, obviously, Providence knows best. So even though it looks kind of sketchy, you should follow that path because it's going to lead you to where you need to go. I'm reminded here, if you have read, how many of you have read George MacDonald's Princess and the Goblin? If you haven't, do it. It is one of the classics of modern fantasy. You must absolutely, one of the foundation stones of modern fantasy. You absolutely must read this book. Those of you who have read it will know what I'm thinking of. That is, I'm thinking of the thread that Irene follows. Irene's fairy grandmother person has this magic thread that she tells Irene to follow, and Irene has to put her finger on the thread, and she can only follow it forward. If she turns back, it goes away. So she can only follow it forward, and it leads her into danger. It leads her right into the heart of the goblin's realm. So here she is, this like unaccompanied 8-year-old princess on her own, walking through the goblin realm, following her grandmother's thread. And she has to maintain her faith in her grandmother's thread. If she follows it, she will be preserved from all harm, and she will be brought to safety, and everything will turn out really well as long as she follows the thread. Sam points out that, yeah, I know she's not just her grandmother; she's her great, huge grandmother, as Irene says. But anyway, the difference here, right? Sam says, okay, guess what? If you do follow the thread, if you follow the path that destiny lays before your feet, guess what? You could just end up in a world of suffering. This does not guarantee, like it does guarantee to Irene and the Princess of the Goblin, that you're going to come through all right, and that your path will be steered so that no harm will come to you. In fact, not all of them, as he points out, came to a good end. Mind you, at least not what folk inside a story, and not outside it, would call a good end. Some tragic endings are beautiful and are powerful and may be good in one sense, that is good to read about, but not fun to experience. Certainly nobody to whom it's happening would consider it a good ending, right? So again, so notice sort of the way in which Sam is kind of wrestling with how destiny, how doom and choice really go together here. And then, of course, this leads him to see their own choices and their own situation in a bigger picture. Baron now. He never thought he was going to get that Silmaril from the Iron Crown in Thangorodrim, and yet he did. And that was a worse place and a blacker danger than ours. But that's a long tale, of course, and goes on past the happiness and into grief and beyond it. And the Silmaril went on and came to Earendil, and why, sir, I never thought of that before. You've got some of the light of it in that star glass that the lady gave you. Why, to think of it, we're in the same tale still. It's going on. Don't the great tales never end? He recognizes this sort of literary discussion he'd just gotten into, thinking about these old stories as illustrations, and clearly, I think, in the context, especially of what Frodo has just said, wrestling with its applicability to them. You know, what does this suggest about us and about our choices and about, you know, what we should do and how we should navigate this path? You know, do we follow this path or do we turn away? And what happens and, you know, and what comes of it? In doing that, he suddenly realizes that he's not just thinking about these old stories and applying them to their situation. He's recognizing that their situation is part of the old stories, that these things, in fact, all come together, and that the great tales never really have an end, that there is, in fact, a real continuity between these. So again, this is not... the old tales which he seemed to be, at least initially, inclined to think of as distant, right? He had this imagination about how the wonderful folk in the old tales were just like obviously totally different than us, right? They have nothing in common with us. We aren't anything like the great heroes of the old stories, who like went out and rescued Silmarils and stuff like for fun because they were having a boring month, so they decided to go kill a dragon or something for recreation. I mean, that's Sam is sort of parodying his own sort of simplistic initial assumptions about stories and the heroes of the old stories. And what he, of course, now recognizes is not only are they not really fundamentally different from us, like they are us. We are in the same position. We are characters, not just characters in a parallel story. We're characters in the same story. The same issues faced by Beren and Luthien are being faced by Frodo and Sam now. There's more to it than just parallelism. It's an interesting way of thinking about it, Mike. Mike says that Sam's mental agility and his imagination, his wrestling with these ideas, provide deeper grounds for his optimism and his cheer. He seems to be able to see himself outside of himself. I agree. I think that's something that Sam does. Just to take one really simple contrast, think of Boromir and how Boromir fails at this very significantly. That is, of thinking of himself outside of himself. Right? He gets so caught up in his own thoughts and in his own desires. He doesn't sort of stop to think about and to sort of recognize what he's doing and what he's thinking. Sam's whole approach here is very different. I am inclined to think that there's that it has something to do with Sam's humility. Chris says he's inclined to be surprised about Sam's knowledge of the Silmaril story. Well, remember, Aragorn sings part of that story to them in verse under Weathertop, and then tells them another version in prose immediately afterwards, and then promises that when they get to Rivendell, they'll hear it told in full, and we're told that they do. So we know that they've heard the story in Rivendell, and quite possibly more than once. So they would know it, but it is certainly interesting that they make the comparison. I mean, in one way, it's the most obvious parallel of all the Silmarillion stories. It's the most obvious parallel to their current situation. Here we are, just the two of us, trying to break all alone into the stronghold of the enemy. Hey, wait, that happened before, didn't it? Tom points out, interestingly, that Aragorn says at Weathertop that the end of Beren and Luthien's story is not known. Well, of course it's not known. It's still going on. Ed points out, this means that Warner Brothers owns the rights to the Beren and Luthien story. Oh, Ed, let's not go there. Good. And of course they heard about Eärendil straight from Bilbo. One last point that I would make about this before we go on is I think that there's also a clear cue here for the reader. There's a wonderful way in which Sam's literary analysis here sort of extrapolates. Here's a character in this story talking about reading the characters in old... So we're reading a story which is supposed to be an ancient to us story about heroes of old who did this great thing. And in that story that we're reading, one of those heroes talks about reading ancient stories about old heroes and how he didn't realize that he was just like them and that he is in the same situation, and that in fact he's part of that same story. You see the logical sort of extrapolation. There's seems to me a kind of an invitation for us as readers to say, hey, actually, maybe there is a sense in which we too are still in the same story, because the great tales don't actually ever end. Yes, as Emily says, 3 cheers for meta-narratives. Absolutely. This is, of course, why every English professor who likes Tolkien loves the passage of Sam and the Stairs of Cirith Ungol, because we postmodern English professors just can't get enough of meta-narrative. But anyway, let's. There are 2 other things that I wanted to talk about tonight. I'm determined to get to at least one of them. So let's do that. The first of those 2 things I wanted to talk about is a choice that Frodo makes. Another sort of decision moment, though it might not sort of seem exactly like one at first. Another way of thinking about these passages, or sort of another question implied in these passages, is just basically what the heck is going on with Frodo. There are a couple odd moments. I want to make sure that we're unpacking them, and I want to see what you guys think about my own readings of these passages, and see if you think I'm right, because I might not be in how I'm understanding these passages, because they're ones which I was not confident in my reading of for a long time. I want to see what we think. Here's Frodo when he's... and I was talking about the descriptions before, and how sometimes when you're in a long passage of description, some people, not Mike Thurway, I know, but some people can get kind of tempted to sort of, you just kind of, your mind kind of goes to sleep for a little bit until something else happens, and you're just kind of registering, hills, trees, got it, trees, more trees, okay, good. So similar here, there's a passage here which I don't even know how many times I read this without even really registering what was going on, just because I didn't understand it. It was so weird. And I just leapt past it. From mead to mead the bridge sprang. This is the description of the Morgul Vale. Figures stood there at its head, carven with cunning, in forms human and bestial, but all corrupt and loathsome. The water flowing beneath was silent, and it steamed, but the vapor that rose from it, curling and twisting about the bridge, was deadly cold. Frodo felt his senses reeling and his mind darkening. Then suddenly, as if some force were at work other than his own will, he began to hurry, tottering forward, his groping hands held out, his head lolling from side to side. Both Sam and Gollum ran after him. Sam caught his master in his arms as he stumbled and almost fell, right on the threshold of the bridge. So my first question, what just happened to Frodo here? Why is Frodo doing the zombie run towards the, with his hands held out and his head lolling around, and he's running towards the bridge? What is going on here? Why is Frodo doing this? That's my first question. Well, let's keep reading here. Frodo passed his hand over his brow and wrenched his eyes away from the city on the hill. The luminous tower fascinated him, and he fought the desire that was on him to run up the gleaming road toward its gate. At last, with an effort, he turned back, and as he did so, he felt the ring resisting him, dragging at the chain about his neck, and his eyes, too, as he looked away, seemed for the moment to have been blinded. The darkness before him was impenetrable. Okay. Mike suggested tractor beam. That's very plausible, Mike. I think that's probably it. I wasn't thinking in those terms, which is why I was doubtless making too much of it. Okay, Diego wants to attribute this to the ring. This is the ring trying to get noticed by the Nazgul. D-May says it sounds like he's got a really bad migraine. Yeah, I can see that. Tom says the ring is making a break for it and dragging Frodo along with it. Yeah, well, okay. There seem to me to be 2 factors involved here. Frodo says, he feels as if some other power other than his own will, some other force were at work other than his own will, he says. So, question is, what force exactly is at work here? There seem to be 2 things, right? One is the power in Morgul Vale itself. We're getting the description of the river and that cold steam that comes off it. There is clearly power. There is clearly what some people would call magic at work here in the Morgul Vale. So that's one possibility, that this is the power of the Morgul Vale acting on Frodo, and there seems to be a certain amount of evidence in support of this. The luminous tower fascinated him, and he fought the desire that was on him to run up the gleaming road towards its gate. Is he being drawn in some sense? Is there in some way a sort of a figurative tractor beam drawing him into the dragging him towards the city? And of course, the other factor is the ring. Is he in, as Chris says, a ring-induced zombie state? That's of course one of the other obvious candidates for a force acting upon Frodo that is other than his own will. I think there is also some pretty clear evidence that the ring is in fact acting on him. Jordan says, his eyes seem the main part. They are fascinated by the tower. Even the road glimmers is a fair-sounding description, and afterwards he's temporarily blinded. Saying that, Frodo has to be careful. Be careful, little eyes, what you see. Yes. When he looked away, he seemed for the moment to have been blinded. The darkness before him was impenetrable. And you know what that reminds me of? You remember that passage? We didn't talk about it at the time. Back in chapter 1 of book 4, when Frodo is on the cliffside, and the storm comes in, and it starts raining, and the wraith flies overhead, and they hear the scream, and everybody's freaking out, and Frodo slides down the cliff and lands on a ledge, and he's blinded. He can't see anything, and Sam is up there like, why the heck can't he see anything? I can see him. It's dim, but it's not pitch dark, and he can't see anything until the rope descends, and then the rope seems to shimmer in the dark, and then Frodo can see again, and he says, Sam, I thought I had been stricken blind. That blindness seems to be very similar to this blindness. And that blindness, too, was associated not with Minas Morgul, but with the wraiths, right? The influence of the wraith as it flew overhead seemed to act on Frodo, creating this blindness. So what do you think? To what extent is this Frodo being acted on by Morgul Vale, and to what extent is this being having the ring acting on him? I think myself that both are at work. I agree with Carol and with Tom before, talking about the ring making a break for it. The ring is clearly wanting to reveal itself to the Witch King. I mean, that's the... this passage, by the way, is, I think, the clearest evidence that the ring wraiths do not detect the presence of the ring in nearly as simple and straightforward a way as a lot of people think about. Remember, Aragorn tells Frodo the ring draws them, there's a lot of people take that as sort of thinking that basically, it's like the ring wraiths have this sensor, that they can pick up on the presence of the ring, and it's like, it's like they can tell when they're getting warmer and when they're getting cold. That clearly isn't the case. If they could sense the simple presence of the ring, the Witch King would have sensed it. I mean, he's in his own valley. He's near the center of his own power, and the ring is right there. It's like yards away from him. He obviously cannot simply detect the proximity of the ring. Now, if Frodo puts it on, he'd be able to sense it, because Frodo would then enter into the Wraith world, and he'd be like, he'd pop into sight right there, right? I mean, he would be suddenly rendering himself visible to the Witch King, as he did on Weathertop when he made himself visible to them. But clearly, they don't simply just sense the presence of the ring when it's there and not being used and not being claimed. So, but the ring does clearly want to reveal itself to them. We see the ring being relatively cunning, actually. Notice that it's not just a question of the ring sensing the presence of the ring wraiths. The ring even seemed to figure out that it would be a good idea to make Frodo put the ring on in the prancing pony, despite the fact that the ring wraiths are not there in the room. So again, it's not just a question of, if I detect, the ring is not simply doing some kind of proximity calculation, right? So I think it seems a fairly safe bet to me that the ring is acting on Frodo, and I am tempted to ascribe that blindness to the ring as well. That the blindness is something that is brought upon Frodo when he is turning away. He is trying to conceal himself he is refusing to expose himself to the wraith that's flying overhead, and he's trying to conceal himself instead. And as a result, as a consequence, he is stricken blind, and he can't see. Here, when he turns away, with an effort, he turned back, and as he did so, he felt the ring resisting him, dragging at the chain, and his eyes, too, as he looked away, in parallel with the dragging of the ring, his eyes, too, seemed for the moment to have been blinded. The parallel there suggests the ring is doing both, I think. But I don't think that means that the fascination and that positive drawing towards the city is just about the ring itself. But notice Sam's not doing a zombie thing, going towards Minas Morgul. In fact, Sam seems to be quite in his right mind and not at all tempted to get any closer to Minas Morgul. And although we all know that Sam is extremely awesome, I don't think that this is a measure of Sam's awesomeness. I think this is the fact that Frodo is made more susceptible to this. That the way in which he is being twisted by the ring, the kind of hold that the ring has over him, is what makes him particularly susceptible to Minas Morgul here. And as especially in conjunction with the ring's positive desire to reveal itself. Good. Good. Yeah. Chris is just pointing out the same thing. Yeah, you're right, Carolyn. It does. It's just the ring may not have a personality, but it has a will with a one-track mind. I want to go home to Daddy. Yes. Yeah, Diego, I was thinking the same thing. Diego's pointing out that, Smeagol, who certainly is plenty corrupted and twisted by the ring, does not seem to be drawn towards Minas Morgul in the same way. But then Diego immediately adds, but it is Frodo who currently has the ring. It's Frodo who is, and I think again of Gandalf's words about Gollum being free of the ring and in some ways stronger now because the ring is no longer, eating him away. Anyway, look at where Frodo goes from here. This is now, after this, they've just barely concealed themselves. This is when the Witch King stops at the bridge and seems to be sensing that something's going on. Even as these thoughts pierced him with dread and held him bound as with a spell, the rider halted suddenly. That is, the thoughts are, oh my gosh, that's the Lord of the Nazgul. That's the guy who stabbed me. His shoulder aches, right? He's recognizing this is the Lord of the the Black Riders. And he's leading this army. Even as these thoughts pierced him with dread and held him bound as with a spell, the rider halted suddenly, right before the entrance of the bridge, and behind him all the host stood still. There was a pause, a dead silence. Maybe it was the ring that called to the Wraith Lord, and for a moment he was troubled, sensing some other power within his valley. The ring is like, over here! No, he can tell there's something here. but he doesn't know what it is. This way and that turned the dark head, helmed and crowned with fear, sweeping the shadows with its unseen eyes. Frodo waited, like a bird at the approach of a snake, unable to move. Fascinated again. And as he waited, he felt, more urgent than ever before, the command that he should put on the ring. But great as the pressure was, he felt no inclination now to yield to it. He knew that the ring would only betray him, and that he had not, even if he put it on, the power to face the Morgul king. Not yet. There was no longer any answer to that command in his own will, dismayed by terror though it was, and he felt only the beating upon him of a great power from outside. Now, the change, I think, that is being emphasized here, and I'm sorry for interrupting the passage, but just want to comment on that sentence before we move on. Remember, Frodo's been tempted by the ring many times before, but usually that temptation took the form of the kind of rationalization and self-deception that we've seen so frequently happen. We see it happen very strongly with Boromir. Galadriel kind of gives us a case study of how it would work. Self-consciously provides a case study. And here, the ring is just using an entirely different tactic, right? There's no response to it in his own will. There's no question of him being tempted to put on the ring. He's not being tempted. He's being overwhelmed. His own will, his own strength. The ring is now just trying to take him over, to daunt and suppress his will rather than to excite it and manipulate it. Notice, though, one little exception to this. The words "not yet" seem to me to be the one small way in which Frodo's will still is. It's not that the ring has completely given up on him. I love that he had not the power to face the Morgul king, not yet, right? Like, in his own mind, Frodo still harbors the idea. He's not tempted because he's like, look, I know for a fact if I put this ring on now, he can't be deceived by the ring. He knows if he puts the ring on, the Witch King is going to see him and is going to destroy him and take the ring. There's no way. Frodo cannot be deceived about that. But there's still the little proviso, right? Someday I might grow very strong. I might grow strong enough to oppose the Witch King. I'm not there yet, right? I got to build up a little bit more. But, someday maybe I could take him down, right? There's just that very brief little flash of maybe I could do it, right? Someday. Not now. Right? So notice even in the midst of this, like just doing the power play here, the ring is still, there's a tiny little hint of that kind of manipulation. Anyway, the great power from outside. It took his hand, and as Frodo watched with his mind, not willing it, but in suspense, as if he looked on some old story far away, like Beren and Luthien or something, it moved the hand inch by inch towards the chain upon his neck. So he's looking at his own hand moving. He is not moving his hand, right? His own will is not responsible for this. His will is being overpowered. His strength is insufficient to overcome the Witch King. His strength is insufficient to overcome the ring. He does not have the power just to say, hand, stop. Do not grab the ring. I choose not to take the ring. So I'm going to sit here, watch me not put the ring on my finger. He doesn't have the power. His hand is just going to the ring, right? His strength has been overcome. His will has been overruled by this great power from the outside. Then his own will stirred. Slowly it forced the hand back and set it to find another thing, a thing lying hidden near his breast. Cold and hard it seemed as his grip closed on it, the phial of Galadriel so long treasured and almost forgotten till that hour. As he touched it, for a while all thought of the ring was banished from his mind. He sighed and bent his head. So you notice what happened there? Frodo doesn't overcome the power of the ring by the strength of his own mind. His will does stir. His will does assert itself, but not just to stop. Right? He does not simply overcome the power of the ring. He doesn't just say to the ring, no, I'm not going to put you on. Sit down and shut up, ring. He doesn't do that. He can't say that. But what he can do, he can't stop his hand, but he can divert it. Right? He can change the direction. Not to the neck, but to the pocket. And get the phial of Galadriel. What he is doing, I have with sort of it's a deliberate provocativeness, subtitled "This Passage Frodo Gives Up." And of course, I don't mean gives up to the ring, but what he does do, the move that he makes here, is not to fight against the ring. That is, not to fight against, to pit his own strength of will against the ring. To do that would be to succumb to it. That's exactly the way the ring wants you to think, that you are strong enough, that you can command, right? That's the whole temptation, right? Instead, he does the only thing that he can do, the only way that he can actually emerge from this situation. He gives up. He recognizes his own will can't. So what does he do? He gets help, right? He needs help. He can't do this on his own. So there is, remembered at the last second, another power that he can appeal to, right? Turns out there's more than one other power in the Wraith Lord's Valley this day. In fact, the valley is crowded with other powers. There are two of them right there under Frodo's clothing. One is the ring, and the other is the phial. And as he touches it, all thought of the ring was banished from his mind. What has clearly happened is the power that is there in the phial, the power of Galadriel, but not only the power of Galadriel, the power also of Eärendil, the Silmaril, and the Valar, who put him up in the sky and set him as the Star of High Hope. Those things now are also brought into play, and what they do is simply kill the thought of the ring. They seem to bring the door down between Frodo and the power of the ring. They just cut off the power of the ring, and his own mind, his own will, is now free again from that overwhelming force that was being brought against him. Had he simply tried to oppose the ring, it wouldn't have worked. But now this does work. Now good. Let me go back and look at a bunch of the comments that you guys have been making here. Tom says, so it's the ring itself that's commanding him to put it on. Yes, I think so. Tom, for a long time, I read this passage as the Witch King commanding him. And, that like the Witch King is looking around and that it's the command of his enemy, the Witch King. And I think what led me to think that is that that's the way the narrator talks after Weathertop, right? When Frodo wakes up and he criticizes himself for weakness of will because he recognizes that it wasn't his own thought to put on the ring, but that he was just obeying the commanding thought of his enemies. But there's a difference. So it does. So there we see the Witch King, in fact, operating on him in that way, right? The Wraith Lord knows that he's there and is in fact bending his will to try to manipulate, to try to command Frodo to put on the ring and reveal himself. Presumably, the ring also cheerfully assisting in this project. Since that dynamic is raised back in Weathertop, I always carried that in my mind through to this passage and imagined that it was the Witch King's power that was overwhelming Frodo here. But then I was sort of recognizing two things. First, I realized that didn't actually make any sense, because if the Witch King knew he was there and was trying to, then he would have presumably stopped, right? I mean, the Witch King wouldn't have carried on and be like, oh, nothing to see here, right? I mean, if he knew Frodo was there and he's like, put on the ring, Frodo. Clearly, he's not. He's gonna put off his attack for at least an hour or two to go try and find the ring. So clearly there cannot be that kind of a conscious thing here like there was at Weathertop. And then also looking more closely at the description here, it's pretty clear that it's the ring itself that's commanding him. Good. Interesting. Kay Kay asks, maybe this is how Faramir experienced the ring in a sense, that he was, he says he doesn't feel any temptation because he saw the ring's appeal as an outside force, not something he desired from within himself. Maybe, I certainly don't get the sense, Kay, that Faramir experienced any, that the ring tried to, carry on this kind of a blitz on him, as it does on Frodo. I'm not sure it could, but Kay, I do see what you mean. That thinking back to what we were saying, Mike, what you were saying about Sam, how Sam can sort of see himself outside himself, and that gives him a kind of strength and a kind of flexibility. Faramir then could sort of be even more sort of self-aware in that way, so that if he does experience temptation to take the ring, he immediately recognizes it as an externally imposed upon him temptation, and not in that he sees it as his own desires being manipulated, not as an expression of his own desire. Maybe, Kay. Maybe that's sort of the secret to overcoming it. Certainly, if you go back and look at the things that the other characters who successfully resist the ring say, the way they talk is kind of like that. Gandalf and Galadriel, I'm thinking in particular. Again, Galadriel's whole, in place of the Dark Lord, you would have a queen's speech. That's exactly what she's doing, right? She says, here's what would happen. Here's why I'm thinking this would be a good idea. Here's what my rationale would be, but here's what would actually happen, right? And again, Gandalf too, saying, the way of the ring, the ring's way to my heart is through pity and the desire to do good, right? He knows the way he's going to be manipulated, and he's like, I'm not even going there, right? I dare not take it, because I know how it would try to manipulate me. Yeah. Oh, interesting. Yeah. Oh, very cool. Yeah. Alyssa is sort of pointing on the same lines of the not yet, right? He didn't have the power to face the Morgul King, not yet. Alyssa is pointing also to the ambivalence of the maybe. There was a pause, a dead silence. Maybe it was the ring that called to the Wraith Lord, and for a moment he was troubled, sensing some other power within his valley. Maybe it was the ring. Maybe it was Frodo. Maybe, Frodo is growing and more powerful, that he could, maybe he's almost ready to oppose the Witch King, right? Maybe, probably not, but maybe. Yeah, I like that. Yeah, maybe he would, right, as Diego is recalling, of course, and Diego is exactly what I was thinking of when I said that. Like he could become the, as Gollum says, maybe he gets very strong, right? Stronger than wraiths. The Gollum. The Gollum. Most precious Gollum. Gollum the Great. Yeah, that seems to be potentially the direction there. Yeah, good. Kay asks, do I think this is how Frodo experiences the final moment at the cracks of doom? It's not Frodo giving into the ring, but Frodo gone entirely and taken over by the outside force? Not going there, Kay. Not going to answer that. We got to wait and look at the passages. But I will say, we have this added to our vocabulary now. This is clearly a thing that Tolkien puts into play, right? That when somebody does something, it's not, your will is not always perfectly free. Sometimes your will might not be constrained by destiny, but can be constrained by other things, like things that are stronger than you and can compel you to do things that you do not choose to do. Unfortunately, even creatures with free will are therefore not entirely free, because their actions can be constrained by other things that have free will and whose power is greater than theirs. Let's see. Jordan, I agree. Jordan says that it's It's a very Christian idea that temptation is defeated with God's help and not by our own strength. Likewise, Frodo draws upon a source outside himself for strength. Yeah, I mean, the two things... Make sure I'm doing one of my patented, let me stop saying this before I feel confident that it's true. I'll go ahead and say it anyway. The two elements that I think are most persistently Christian in the sort of, sort of the moral themes of this story are hope and humility. Those are the two things I always come back to. Sacrifice, to some extent, though in a sense to me that's actually sort of a subset of humility in the way that I'm thinking about it. So Jordan, I would put this in the humility camp. That, yeah, it's not by your own strength that Frodo succeeds here. Frodo is saved here by this choice that he makes to seek for help beyond himself. Yeah. Good. Jordan says, "Are we even sure the Witch King feels a disturbance?" Yeah, I mean, looking at that, if we look at just the syntax of that sentence again, maybe it was the ring that called to the Witch Lord, and for a moment he was troubled. The syntactic question is, does the maybe carry over? That is it only being brought to us as a possibility that he is troubled? I think not. I think what we're getting at here is an indicative statement. For a moment he was troubled, sensing some other power within his valley. That definitely happened. He was definitely troubled, and he definitely sensed some other power within his valley. Maybe it was the ring that called to the Wraith Lord, leading to that definite thing. And that's why he looks around. So one could say, okay, hang on a second. If he feels some other power in his valley, why doesn't he call it off there? I mean, okay, so he doesn't know it's the ring. Still, that's pretty suspicious, right? I mean, who's going to be in his valley? Well, he turns aside, or his thought is turned aside by Frodo. That's his mind is, Frodo's mind is strengthened and turns aside the thought of his enemy. That is, he senses some other power within his valley. He seems to move on because he dismisses it. No, I guess I was wrong. Because he doesn't say, he looks around. Wait, is there something there? Is there something there? And what he finds is, no, I don't sense anything. Why? Because his thought has been deflected by Frodo through the file. That's what the file does. Almost like a spiritual version of the cloak that he's wearing, right? It deflects the attention of the enemy there. Yeah. Good. Excellent. Interesting, Kay. Kay is, that wonderful image, this way and that turned the dark head, helmed and crowned with fear, sweeping the shadows with its unseen eyes. And Kay is wondering if there might be some potential ambiguity here that, of course, he does use fear as a weapon, but is there a sense in which he himself is afraid in this moment that he is crowned with fear in that sense? I don't think that's a strong sense here. That is, I certainly don't think Tolkien in this description is inviting us to imagine the Witch King standing in terror. And obviously I'm exaggerating, Kay, the point that you're making on purpose. Because I don't sort of think about it in that way, I don't think so. But there's certainly, there's always an irony to those who use darkness and fear, especially in Tolkien. They tend to be, by their own weapons they will be worsted. That this, so evil will shall evil mar. That oft times is seen. This is the kind of thing that happens quite a bit. There will come a moment where he will have a pause in doubt, not necessarily fear. That is, when he realizes that the person he is fighting is in fact not a man. But I think maybe there might be kind of an invitation to perceive a level of irony there, but I don't think it's very strong. Yeah. Can we think the Witch King has more than one moment of doubt? Yeah, sure, I think so. There is some doubt here. It's doubt of a different kind. I don't think he's doubting himself. He doubts himself when he's confronted by Éowyn. I don't think he is doubting himself here. And of course, as Carolyn points out, he is in haste as well. And he does send people to check, just in case. There is word from down below. The Silent Watchers are uncertain. There seems to be some unease down in Morgul Vale that something was there, so they're checking to make sure. Or at least so we hear from Gorbag later on. Well, the last of the things I wanted to get to was Gollum and Gollum's choice, but that I think I'm going to have to save until next time. We will start with that, and that's actually... I'm very comfortable doing that because I think we can then look at it in the context of what we see of Gollum in the last two chapters. So I'm just as well. I think that will turn out to be a fortunate delay. So we will look at the turning point for Gollum and the Sam Gamgee show next time. But of course, needless to say, I will say the very ironic thing, needless to say, and then proceed to say it, of course. But considering we've been spending 4 solid weeks coming back again and again to the choices people make and on what basis they make choices, and the kind of dilemmas that people are in and the significance of the decisions and the judgments that they make, I don't probably need to mention that since we're going to be talking about a chapter called The Choices of Master Samwise, maybe that's going to come in relevant again, and we should be thinking about Sam's choices in the context of Frodo's choice and Aragorn's choices and Faramir's choices and Saruman's choices and Gandalf's choices and Gollum's choices that we see happening here. We'll get a lot of this that we can kind of come together and bring. We have, this book culminates here with this same idea that's been running continually throughout it as we've been studying. So I look forward to Thursday afternoon at the normal European friendly time for those who do not have Yana's dedication and stamina to join us here even in the middle of the night. Over in Europe, we will be at a much more friendly European time, 4:30 p.m. Eastern time. We will be back again on Thursday for our final class, and I will look forward to that. I mentioned before that we will probably do 1 or 2 little sort of bonus sequences. We'll do one more week in the Silmarillion tradition, the Silmarillion seminar tradition, because I do want to be able to get to some more open questions. These classes have been really sort of shaped by the stuff that I wanted to do, the passages I really wanted to look at, and I know that I have left to the side a lot of topics and things that are totally unrelated that you guys have wanted to talk about. So I want to get a chance to do that. So I want to do a session or 2 where we go over, we do some of those things. I go back and look at some of the topics that you've suggested and any other questions you have, and we'll do a sort of a more open kind of Q&A discussion. So this week will probably not, in fact, be the very last week in which we talk about the Two Towers, but the last of our regular reading schedule. So thanks for joining me, everybody, and I hope you have a good rest of the week, and we will look forward to our final session on our final regular session on Thursday. So thanks very much. Good night, everybody. Bye.